This is Weights and Wealth, your one-stop shop for entertaining education on building a stronger body and bank account.
We are not doctors or financial advisors and must warn you this is not medical or investing advice. It is for your entertainment.
Welcome back to Weights and Wealth. This might be a little bit of an uncomfortable episode for some people, but Nick and I decided it was an episode that we had to do anyway. So we're going to do it, and we hope people listen through the whole thing. But if people turn it off, we understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that a lot of people don't like to talk about just because it's really hard to talk about. And it is kind of a harder conversation for us to have. But I think it's something that needs to be talked about and is very important.
But the fact that it is very hard for a lot of people to talk about tells me that it's something people know is like wrong and that they probably should change how they live their life in this area that we're going to dive into. Also, this is a big faith episode, I guess, for our 5Fs, and also family/friends, I guess, as well. So covers 2 of our 5Fs. The shout out for this episode is to our ladies, Alex and Lizzie, for being women of class and allowing us to do this podcast because it takes a lot of our time. And Nick and I don't have a ton of time, but Alex and Lizzie let us spend a lot of time doing this podcast, and they're very supportive of us. So we'd like to thank them for sacrificing some of their time with us and letting us have our man time working on Weights and Wealth. Yeah,
Lizzie has been extremely supportive of this since I met her, because we started doing this before I met her. But she has actually been, pushing me to like work on it more. And I think it's very important to have someone in your life that pushes you to be better and to do things that are good.
As iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another, right, Nick?
It does, yeah.
All right, we've got an intro article here. Nick is going to guide us through the intro article, but we found it from a Twitter thread from a guy, I think his name is Noland. His Twitter is NolandKnows, and he brought up this 600-page book, I think, by a man named J.D. Unwin. Is that right, Nick?
I think so.
Yeah, and what's the title of the book?
Why Monogamy Matters.
No, that's the thread. What's the book called?
Oh, Sex and Culture. It was originally published in Sex and Culture, and then the title of this article is Why Monogamy Matters.
So anyway, we've got an article that NolandKnows wrote that basically distills the 600-page book, some of the main principles of it. And it's interesting because the way that society has trended with the sexual revolution back in the 60s, flower power and all that stuff, we've seen a decline, I think, in the fabric of America and definitely in religious values since then. And it's interesting that this book is based off that, before that happened, predicting the decline of America by 2060.
Yeah, and so they're called non-monogamous relationships, which that's just polygamy. You can just call it really what it is. And polygamy, there have been polygamous societies, but none of them have really flourished. Like, we don't really see any very successful polygamous societies. They're all monogamous, right? I mean, you could say the Mormons in Utah, but they are, I wouldn't say by any means flourishing. They're kind of stuck in their own little sect. And
are Mormons still polygamous? Is that, I think a lot of them are not, right?
There are, so within Mormonism, there are various kind of, I don't know what to call it, like sub-religions sort of.
Yes, sects, just kind of like Protestantism.
Yes, yeah. And a very small amount of Mormons actually practice polygamy. Okay. But there is a Netflix documentary about it that I watched, and it is kind of interesting. It's a cult essentially.
Yeah,
I think. But most of this just talks about how important monogamy is. And one thing that the original author really called out and said was, any human society is free to choose either to display great energy or to enjoy sexual freedom. The evidence is that it cannot do both for more than one generation, which is why I don't think we've seen any very successful polygamous societies. And that's kind of the route that America is going with the sexual revolution. And I think, unfortunately, people are starting to base more and more of their identity based on sex. And honestly, I think that would be a very sad, unfulfilling life. Like, you don't have any higher goals than just the person that you have sex with or the people you have sex with. I don't know. I just wouldn't want to live that kind of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the article and more largely the book itself, a lot of it is focused on how when the less monogamous a society is, the more sex outside of marriage that occurs, the less productive it is. One of the book club books for Weights and Wealth, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, it was a chapter, maybe like 10 or 11. It was like 2/3 of the way through the book. There's like, it's all about wealth and like thinking like things you can do to grow rich and your thought process for becoming wealthy. And then there's one chapter in there about sex and about like abstaining from sex and how it makes you more productive because of the energy that it like increases your energy when you abstain from sex, which is somewhat of like a weird pseudoscience kind of thing with like semen retention that's popular right now on some varieties of Reels and TikTok. Some segments of the internet are really into that right now. But it's interesting that I thought of Think and Grow Rich in that chapter when we were reading through this article.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes into also having your need for food always met. I mean, when people are hungry, their body kind of goes into hunting mode, right? And you're more alert all the time, which is why fasting is a good thing, or part of the reason why it's a good thing. And so essentially this guy predicts like the fall of America by 2060. That is yet to be seen. I don't think that we're trending in a good direction overall right now. It can also be reversed though.
I think if you look at America's trajectory, one of the large issues that we're currently facing is the rise of one-parent households. The statistics are very obvious that when there's not a father in the home, that child is more likely to face many adverse events in life, including prison time, not graduating high school, and a cascade of different statistics. So with more freedom around people's sexuality, it breeds less two-parent households, which then affects the success of more people's lives. Not that you can't be successful if you grow up in a one-parent household. It's just the statistics generally show that you're less likely to be successful.
Yeah, and that kind of just compounds over time. And this guy points out that that you can withstand that for a few generations. But as that continues, I mean, these kids who are ending up in jail or aren't graduating high school aren't, really fully developed, and then they can't really raise kids themselves. Or if they do, they'll raise them how they were raised. And that's just very unfortunate. All right, shall we get into the talk? Ted recently found a pretty cool study with some cool statistics.
Oh, yes, this study. 98% of girls have cooties. So guys, stay away from girls. No, there was no cootie study. But moving on.
Well, I do have a question for you for the actual talk. Okay, where would you rank these 4 adjectives from 1 to 4? Pretty, cute, hot, and beautiful. If you had to rank them from best to worst.
From best to worst? In what context?
In what you prefer?
For like a woman?
Yeah.
It's hard because there's like slight variations
they
to
are,
each, right?
Yeah.
So probably beautiful, beautiful and pretty are pretty close. So I feel like I can space them one and four, maybe.
Okay.
So maybe beautiful, cute, hot, pretty.
Okay. Very similar to mine. Mine goes beautiful, cute, pretty, hot.
Okay.
So I don't know. It's just kind of, I don't know. I talked about that with Cooper one time and we went on like a 30-minute conversation about why. But, well, we can get into the meat of our podcast now. And we'll start off with the good qualities, like what Ted and I have kind of always envisioned our wife to have.
Yeah, I think this would be interesting if we haven't lost all of our female listeners by this point in the episode, because I think this is common in guys, but it's weird to women that we do this. But we essentially have like kind of like a checklist of things that we look for in a woman, and if she meets those criteria, then we'll see how it goes. You know, we'll start dating her. If she doesn't meet those criteria, then we're not going to try to start dating her. So we have like checklists. So Nick and I both essentially had like these checklists for what we look for in a woman. I think this is common for guys, but when Alex and I first started dating, I said something at one point about like, oh yeah, well, like, because she asked me like maybe what I had found attractive maybe in her or something. And it somehow I said something around, you checked like all my boxes. And she was like, what do you mean? And I was like, oh, like I have like a list of like qualities that I'm looking for. And so of course she had to see the list. So I showed it to her and she literally hit, there's like, I've got it here. I copied and pasted it here from the Google Doc that I had, but there's like 40 things on it. And there was like one thing that she didn't check off,
which
and
I don't think is true.
She always brings it up, and I'm like, babe, I love you. Like, why bring up the literal one thing? But like some of the things on here are friendly, adventurous, a reader, has close, good girlfriends, financially literate, likes cooking, wants a lot of kids, small government ideas, pretty but also cute, Nick. Healthy, enjoys lifting, wants to read my book suggestions, gives me great books, not a gossiper, treats strangers with respect, brings me closer to God, black hair. So just, you know, random things, different physical attributes. So, and then Nick's got a similar list as well.
Yeah. So I just think sharing like the same religion is important because there can be a lot of disagreement that comes from that. Same with finances. Like the wealth wisdom of the week is to talk to your girlfriend or boyfriend about finances because it's one of the top reasons that people get divorced. Another thing that is like 100% needed is just pure honesty. Like relationships are just built on trust. And I think that if you can't be honest with the person that you're with, your relationship is kind of built on a facade. Like it's not completely true. Like the person doesn't 100% really know you. Strives to better herself, values herself. When you value yourself, not just in this situation, but across the board, people will respect you more. And that really just goes into taking care of yourself and just really knowing what you're worth. Has real interests. This is something that is kind of blows my mind how hard this is to actually find. A lot of people today just kind of their weekends is brunch or lunch or dinner and going getting drinks. And I kind of want somebody that has their own like specific interest, like a hobby. Like Lizzie has her horses, and I think that's really cool. I've never ridden a horse before, but like it's cool that she has interests. And I guess kind of knows what she wants. We can get a little bit into decision making. We'll be talking about decision making, but just, you know, having like a vision, whether that happens or not, just having a vision for the future and kind of having thought about the things that you want and being able to explain why. Another one is not too worldly. Like to me, at least, having brand names is a big red flag. That kind of screams like, I need material goods to be happy to me. And, I kind of want someone that values, not to say if you have brand name things that you don't value relationships more. It's just like a red flag that makes me think that you might not value relationships as much.
Yeah.
Because personally, I like to spend my money on things with friends, whether it be going on a trip or just doing something cool.
Yeah, I feel like you and I are both experiences over things kind of people. And I guess Lizzie and Alex are the same way. So that's good for us.
Yeah.
Because so I feel like for some of the things on these lists, they're much more like qualities. We do have some things about interests as well, but they're more like qualities about the person. And I think it's good to know what you're looking for, especially if you're dating for marriage, which in my opinion is like the only reason to date. But yeah, I think it's important to know as a man like what you're looking for and what you're looking for in a wife.
It is. And then it's just as important to make sure that you're a guy that a woman who's like that will be interested in.
Yes, that's the we hit this in the Pastor Brandon interview episode. So if you missed that interview, make sure you go back. I forget what episode it is. It's pretty early on, maybe episode like 10 or 12. But in that episode, Pastor Brandon told us that if you're looking to find like the perfect wife, you need to be the man that she is going to be looking for.
Yeah, because if you want all these things, but you yourself are kind of just like a lowlife and don't actually possess any of these qualities, then someone who's like that won't be interested in you.
Yeah.
And then the last two things are has good friends and has opinions. I like when people actually have opinions on things. It's a lot more interesting to talk to them than just somebody that says, I don't know, or I don't care.
Yeah, Nick loves me even though I'm very opinionated.
No, it makes me like people that much more when they have very strong opinions. I don't care if I agree with them or disagree with them, but people who have strong opinions tend to be very, very interesting. All right, did you want to go over anything else?
No, I shared a few things from my list, but I feel like we got our point across on just kind of like having a list. And I think it's interesting to girls because they don't have lists like we do. And like Alex was really surprised that I had a list like that. I'm not sure if Lizzie was surprised that you had a list like that.
I mean, mine wasn't written down. It was in my head. I mean, so it wasn't very hard to go through and write these things down. I mean, she didn't say anything about it when I told her. I mean, I've told her this, and I showed her that part of the outline for this episode, and she was just like, huh.
All right, so now we're going to get into, do you want to go into porn or hookup culture first?
Let's start with hookup culture first, because we can kind of lead into it. But like the first question is there actually hookup culture? Because sexual inactivity has been on the rise, more so for men than women. The percentage of men that have not had sex in the last year has gone from 18.9% in 2000 to 30.9 in 2018. Now that's a huge jump. What the study kind of attributed that to is porn, longer work hours, postponement of normal things like sex and dating, increased rates of depression, and lower number of sexual partners for men who make less money. I mean, I think all of those are very valid explanations. It's probably a combination of all of them. The one I did want to hit on is the postponement of normal things like sex and dating. A lot of people will wait to get married until their finances are in order. I've never really understood. I mean, to an extent I do, or to finish school, but if this is really the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, all of that shouldn't really matter. And you can do that kind of stuff together and support each other through it. Did you want to hit on any one of those?
No, I think you covered it pretty well there. I do think part of that rise could also be attributed to dating apps, or maybe not dating apps, like hookup apps, because this is talking specifically about sex. And something like Tinder, you're going to have a percentage of men at the top that are going to get most of the women, and then there's going to be anyone that's under 6 foot that's not going to get.
Yeah.
Like there's things that a lot of women will look for on those apps, and if you're not like tall, dark, and handsome, then like it's going to be a lot harder, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that I think apps like that are really impacting a lot of these people that aren't in the upper echelon of either like status or salary or things like that.
Yeah, and one of the things on the dating apps is we had a whole debate at work about this. But when I changed my height, so I'm 5'11", I changed my height to 6 foot. The amount of matches I got went through the roof.
Dude, it's 100% a thing.
It is, and I don't know why, but it is. I mean, like I kind of get it. Taller guys are generally more attractive, but is 1 inch really that big of a deal?
Well, that's the thing. Like in person, I don't think girls really care. It's just when they're on these apps, they're just gonna swipe left if it's not 6 foot, which is ridiculous. But I mean, like there's so many other things about a person other than their height. And if you're talking about like the average woman is what, like 5'5" or 5'6", she's not gonna be able to tell if a guy is like actually 6 foot in real person, right? She might think. I mean, I don't know what it's like to be that. I do know what it's like to be that short because I was that short in high school. But like back then, it's just like everyone was taller than me. So I don't know. But
yeah, and I mean, Ted met Alex on Hinge. I met Lizzie on Hinge as well. And one thing I really like about Hinge is it makes you answer 3 prompts. And as I was going through the profile, sometimes people would just put the same answer for every single one just to get through it, and those are automatic no's because like it doesn't seem like they have any personality. And I think that's one of the ways that Hinge differentiates itself really well from things like Tinder, is that it forces people to kind of express your personality. And I think that's why it's become more of the app for a relationship rather than just a hookup.
yeah, well, Tinder is geared towards like looking for hookups, right? But then Hinge, you can more tell a little bit about someone's personality and what they do. And there's things on there where you can see like their religion and their education, and you can kind of make your decision, I guess, based more along those lines. And that, yeah, I mean, if you're like guys out there, like if you're looking to find your wife, you shouldn't be on Tinder. You should be on Hinge, and you shouldn't be looking for sex. You should be looking for a relationship.
And I think Hinge is even, I wouldn't say better than meeting somebody in person, but it at least lets you like really vet somebody based on how they want people to perceive them. Like they can write about themselves, and that's how they want to be perceived. I think that says a lot about somebody. All right, moving on. Another thing this study said is that lower sexual activity has been associated with increased mortality. Now, this isn't something that the study said. If I were to venture a guess, it's because healthy people are more attractive, so therefore they have more sex. Like that is, I don't know. That's a pretty easy conclusion for me to draw, at least.
That is a pretty easy conclusion to draw, I think.
So I think it'd be taking it the wrong way, where if you were to say that sex increases your lifespan.
Yeah. I mean, that's just an easy way to skew the conclusion of data, right?
And then the next study we have looked at the relationship between multiple sex partners with anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. So it did not find any link between anxiety and depression, although at the end it listed about 10 other studies that found an association with sexual risk-taking and depression and anxiety, which were things like early age at first intercourse, multiple partners, lack of condom use. And then it found a big association with mental health problems.
Yeah, that's not surprising to me if you take just the faith angle alone. Like God says not to have premarital sex and to not commit adultery, right? And it's in 100 places throughout the Bible, right? So if you are doing those things, then you probably don't have maybe as good of a relationship with God. Maybe you might, but I think there's a good chance you don't. And in that case, I think there's a much larger chance of mental health issues. I think when people don't have a good relationship with God, they're much more likely to have some of these mental health concerns.
Yeah, and then they could just be like, we don't really know which one causes which. Like, I could see when people are depressed, they generally look for a quick, easy way to make themselves feel better, and that could be one of the ways. But as Ted and I always talk about, a quick, easy, short-term fix doesn't really have long-term benefits usually. And I think that this is one of those situations. I don't really think, because with hookup culture, you're missing the relational aspect, and I think that is really what makes people happy. I mean, my number one priority in my life is really, well, relationships, essentially. Your relationship with God, relationships with my family, friends, Lizzie, etc. And when you kind of separate sex and relationships, you don't really have the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that was just about, I mean, I think all I had for that.
That was well said at the end there. I don't think you can really separate sex and relationships. So for people that are engaging in hookup culture, that are trying to separate those things, whether it's because of cultural influences or, like you mentioned, trying to like fill a void or something like that, I think they wind up having this kind of like mental anguish from like cognitive distortion of trying to separate things that can't be separated.
Yeah. And then this same study kind of had some graphs that kind of, it separated men and women, and then the percentage of the population that have had the number of sexual partners in the past year. So it was 0, 1, 2, and greater than 3. And men tend to be on the tail ends of 0 and then greater than 3, whereas women tend to be like 1 is by far their highest. Which, I mean, at least that's showing commitment. I think that's something that's very good. So guys need to do a little bit better.
Be better.
Yeah. But was there anything else that you wanted to talk about on this subject? Did you want to get into porn at all?
Is that a separate episode, or is that part of this episode?
I don't think we have an outline for it yet.
Okay.
But
well,
if you want,
then maybe we'll start compiling an outline for an episode on porn and what studies are showing with porn. I know that there has been a huge increase in erectile dysfunction in men, especially like young men, like 20 to 25 and 30. And they think that that's because of a kind of loss of sensitivity to like sex, basically, from just constantly watching porn. And I know that it like affects different areas of the brain differently, but we can do an episode on that, because I think that's a issue that affects a ton of young men. I remember when I was in college, my brother told me that someone in his grade had told a story about getting in trouble in 6th grade watching porn at school. It blew my mind that like in 6th grade watching, like we just talked in the last episode about like smartphones and using smartphones for porn. Like I didn't even know you could do that until like the end of high school. Like it didn't even, like, I guess I was also like a really late bloomer, so maybe that had something to do with it. But I know that it's an issue that's affecting a lot of young men because of how accessible it is.
And yeah, I forget the exact age that boys are first exposed to porn, but it was a lot lower than, or a lot earlier than what I would thought it was going to be. I think it's around 11 years old, whether it just be on TV, because a lot of movies have it now too, or just accidentally coming across it on, I mean, Twitter or Reddit. It's all over both those sites too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you use Reddit a lot more than I do.
And it has a not suitable for work tag, so it's blurred out at first. But what do you think a 12-year-old boy is going to do? He's just click OK. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll do a separate episode on that issue in the future. So if you are interested in us doing that, make sure to let us know so that we can get started on putting information together for that. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining us today at Weights and Wealth. And don't forget to apply today's lessons to live healthy and wealthy.
If this conversation will contribute to your fitness and financial gains, please share it with a friend or family member and give a 5-star review so more people can lift bigger weights and get bigger bank accounts.